Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this one, we got ourselves kind of an interesting conversation. Perhaps heated topic, spirited debate, people on the comic book Facebook group talking about low-grade raw AF15s and essentially arguing over the grade and thus the value of these books that are going up for sale. And so in this video, I kind of wanted to talk about this because I feel like it, touches many different points within the comic collecting sort of e-commerce hobby that we all sort of exist in, least of which is the fact that, yes, no matter how you feel about it, third-party grading sometimes is necessary, especially when you're dealing with books as valuable as an AF15. But of course, before I get into the video, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, I appreciate it. Helps support the channel doing those things, but let us get into this video here today. Now, this is something that I want to say, I'm not here to call anyone out in this particular thread. I'm not here to, shame anyone into, how they grade books. I myself definitely make mistakes. I get things wrong all the time. I'm just here to re-emphasize that not all information on the internet is correct. People have different opinions. I know, myself included. Even the information in all of my videos, even though it is 99.9999999% accurate, I too am human and I too get things wrong from time to time. So with that, I'm not here to call anyone out. I'm just here to sort of re-emphasize to you guys how important it actually is to learn how to grade and to understand what fair market values are. Subscribe to one of the pricing guides. It doesn't matter which one you decide to pick. Just get one of them so that you know the ballpark for which things are selling. But let's get into this post right here. This is a post that came from somebody looking to sell their low grade raw AF15. Unfortunately, this person has sort of run into some financial issues and needs to kind of move this book sooner rather than later. Now, the person actually had listed this thing at around $14,000 or best offer. And, in my opinion, $14,000 for a low grade AF15, which I determined this book, just in looking at the pictures, that this is definitely a 1.0. I feel extremely confident calling it a 1.0. I mean, maybe you could squeeze a 1.5 out of this book. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, the spine is definitely splitting in a lot of sections, and usually CGC is pretty harsh on the spine. But for sure, you're going to get a very decently presenting 1.0 copy, and a list price of $14,000 to start, I actually think is pretty reasonable overall. You can see the book right here. There's the back. Of course, the cover is detached. The spine is fairly split. I'd say that that's almost a 100% split right there. You do have it still attached here down at the bottom, and you have maybe partial attachments here at the top, and then I don't know if there's any other little threads hanging on right here in the middle lower section of the book, but partially attached. But either way, once it's in the case, once it's in the Mylar, it's a decent looking 1.0. I mean, I've seen definitely worse looking ones. And so for that reason, I think a $14,000 or best offer starting point is really not all that bad. But this person got kind of, I'm not going to say roasted, but I would say that people definitely called him out, in the chat right here, where people were saying, I would be interested and could come and meet for pickup, but we would need to come to Jesus on a realistic price. 0.5 in today's market is around $9,500 to $10.5K. Price crashed hard last year and some change. His current ask is 1.8 based on GPA sales. This will not grade over a 1.0 and will most likely grade a 0.5. But, even when I go over here to GPA and I look at Amazing Fantasy 15, 1.8 sales, well, he definitely has a price lower than what the 1.8s are selling for. The last sale for a 1.8 was actually $16,200. And the times before that were actually even higher than that. You have $16,200, you have $18,000 earlier in April, you have a $15,000 on the low, you have $16,552 and $18,600. So, based on what I see, this person is definitely below the 1.8 selling prices for this. Even here at the 1.5, you guys know how inconsistent it can be here at the floor price, but even at the 1.5 level, I mean, last sale for that here in this month was $18,600. February was $14,569, and then in January, there was actually a $20,000 sale. So I would actually say that, again, where he's starting with his price at $14,000 is near the 1.0 price, where the 1.0 sold for $12,700. The May price was $11,000, and then the January price was $15,000. So, if you have a reasonable offer, I'm sure that he would accept $12,000 for his particular comic book. But again, there's a lot of discussion and debate over what the grade of his comic book actually is. Another person says here, I would recommend having it graded by either CGC or CBCS. For one, it can preserve it, and two, it will provide a reasonably accurate grade for you to determine the sale price. Now, the lister actually goes on to say that he can't afford to send it to CGC because, he needs money now. This person says it would come back a 0.5 because the cover is detached. Well, the cover being detached is definitely not true. You can get a 3.0 with a detached cover. Since it's a complete, I think it will be higher. I saw a cover less than one that was 0.5. I think he's between a 1 and a 1.8. I actually agree with this person. If he can swing getting it graded, he might find he has a more valuable copy and the negotiation won't have to revolve around quality. And that's sort of the main point right there, is that people just don't agree. I mean, maybe you're somebody watching this video right now that definitely feels like, oh yeah, that's a 0.5 all day. But definitely by CGC standards, as far as I understand CGC standards, that would definitely get a 1.0. I mean, you can have a detached cover, completely split spine, as long as the book is complete and it's not missing, significantly large pieces, which this book is not. You're going to get back a 1.0. And I thought that this is really interesting because this person says the cover is completely detached. Regardless if it's complete, it automatically gets a 0.5. Well, that is just not true. That is actually wrong. And what's so interesting to me is that he's got 4 upvotes on that particular comment. And again, it just leads us back to sort of the bigger point and sort of the main thing I kind of wanted to get into with this video is, the idea that this is why people send in high value books for grading, because collectibles are the Wild West. Nobody is going to agree on, what the grades are. There's so many variables that come into play. People have different aesthetics that they like or don't like, and you need essentially what is a third party to come in and sort of at least give their opinion on what the grade of the book is, and thus what the potential value of that book actually would be as well. And this can work both ways. I mean, I'm sure the person who is selling their copy wants to get the most money that they can get. And I'm sure that the buyer who's buying it wants to know that, hey, if I do buy this and I do decide to get it graded, I'm going to get a complete copy, right? I'm going to get a 1.0, and so they want to be protected as well. And at least when it's graded, you're going to get some of that transparency. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, oh, Swaggle you're being a shill here, a graded shill. And it's like, no, again, I'm not trying to, shill for any one particular graded company. I'm not trying to, shame any particular individual out there for how they go about grading comic books. I mean, I realize there is definitely a subjective component to this, but with the nature of online buying, and the high price that people are paying for a book like an AF15, I mean, you have to have at least some framework for which you can sort of decide like, yes, okay, we think that this book is worth this, or we think that this is generally the grade. And then you, the buyer, and you, the seller, can go from there. And this works both ways. This is one raw copy that I wanted to point out to you guys, while we were having this conversation. This is over on Heritage Auctions. And this is something that I thought was, kind of the inverse, where somebody massively overpaid for a raw comic book because maybe they thought that this was a higher grade than it was. As you can see right here, this was sold on December 25th of last year. It kind of actually where the market was even more down than where it was, currently. And this raw copy sold for $18,600. And actually, if you go here into the fine print with Heritage, it'll say right here, pieces missing from the cover, spine fully split. So this is a fully split spine. So in my estimation, this would actually grade out to be a 1.0. But that being said, from what we'd established with GPA, $18,600 is way too much for you to be paying for this book as a raw copy. The 1.0s, again, recently selling around the $12,000 range, and even a 1.8, is not even necessarily selling at the $18,000 level, although this 1.5 got an $18,000 not too long ago. Similarly here, I mean, you look at a book like this, asking price of $15,000. This is one that is actually in a slab, a CBCS one, at a 1.5 grade. But what do you notice from this book? Professional conservation includes staples replaced. Cover and centerfold are detached. Now, staples replaced, professional conservation, that's one that would be extremely difficult to determine if this was actually in its raw form. I mean, maybe if you know to look for it, you'd be able to say, oh, okay, this has had, the staple swapped out. But I think most people would never be able to tell, especially online. If you were just selling it and this person just posted a bunch of images like this, I mean, you wouldn't really be able to tell that the staples were not the original staples. And so again, another reason why having books graded actually does help, the consumer in a lot of cases. And even in this one right here, another one that is from the comic book Facebook group. I mean, this person was kind of getting into a different conversation about, pricing and floor pricing, and maybe we can kind of finish out with that. But one of the things I thought was interesting about this is that this person kind of pulled one of the current eBay listings that has a raw AF15 that's a $18,000 list price with a Stanley signature. But this person didn't realize that even in the title here, it says apparent, which in case you guys don't know, apparent and this little R that's in parentheses actually means that the book is restored. I actually think that part of the cover is reattached or something like that. Maybe it has color touch on it. And so this person didn't even know that the book that he was bringing up as part of a conversation for a floor price for an A15 is actually a restored book. And so they themselves, weren't able to sort of detect that, which again goes back to the idea of having that third-party transparency would have made it very, very clear for everybody who's looking at this listing to understand, oh, okay, this is a purple label. Okay, it has restoration on it. Not to say that the listing isn't transparent. I mean, it's literally here in the title, but obviously a big purple label over top of the book is going to make it that much easier for people to detect, especially when they're buying online. Well, that's all for this video. Again, I think it's very interesting to see, how people talk about comic books online. In my opinion, some of the most best advice that I've ever got was, just making sure that you have access, one, to a pricing guide, and then number two, you yourself know how to grade. I think that those are, some of the most important things because you have to know, like, hey, if I buy this book, am I going to get a complete copy? Is it going to be incomplete? What is the fair market value? What's the current going rate? Is $14,000 for a 10A15? Is that a good, asking price? In my opinion, that's actually a really great starting price, especially when you consider, what is currently available on places like eBay, where, the floor price for a complete AF15, I mean, you have to already go up to $20,000 in a graded price, which again, we've established is probably a little too high for what this book should be. It also has some aesthetic flaws on it that are maybe not ideal. But these prices essentially represent what the high floor is for these books because, if there was a book that was listed at $15,000 and it was a 1.5, it probably would have been bought already. I mean, which is why you have the 0.5 right here sitting at $16,000. I mean, it's not worth $16,000. Otherwise someone would have bought it. But the reason that you can't find a 0.5 copy for less than that is because, well, if it was priced for less than that, well, then somebody would have bought it, which is why, again, this is actually a pretty decent starting point for this particular copy. And I think it's really interesting that people didn't feel the same way because they themselves have a different grading standard, which I actually think is incorrect. But that's all I got for this video. Let me know what you guys think. Thought it'd be an interesting conversation to have with you guys here today. Really, really important. Make sure you have access to some kind of pricing guide. Doesn't matter which one, just pick one just so you know where you are in terms of the ballpark. And then number two, learn how to grade. I mean, one of the most important things you could do for yourself. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. Let me know what you guys think. Like, comment, subscribe. Be safe out there. See you all in the next one.